What happens when arrogance meets the true essence of humility? At the university where Chris, Ethan, and Vincent reign supreme, their reputation as womanizers and oppressors is about to be challenged by a young woman who isn't swayed by appearances. These three inseparable friends, known for their wealth and despicable behavior, take pleasure in humiliating those they consider inferior. However, the arrival of Brenda, a new student with exceptional grades and a simplicity that conceals a powerful story, promises to turn their lives upside down. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent used to circulate in circles of popularity and status, believing that wealth made them invulnerable. They had always been the life of the parties and the center of conversations, but when Brenda arrives, something changes. Although she dresses simply, her intelligence shines through, and her character stands out in an environment that values superficiality. When confronted by this new presence, the three friends, in an attempt to reaffirm their superiority, devise a cruel plan to humiliate Brenda at a lavish party. They invite her, certain that she would feel out of place and ridiculed. However, the party takes an unexpected turn. Brenda arrives with her boyfriend Alex, both radiant and exuding confidence. What Chris, Ethan, and Vincent didn't know was that Brenda came from an influential and wealthy family. Her simplicity was a choice, a way to remain true to herself. The trio's plan turns into a complete fiasco, and they find themselves at the center of attention, the targets of laughter and disdain. Meanwhile, Brenda, with her dignity intact, becomes the true heroine of the night. After the public embarrassment, social media does not forgive. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent have no choice but to face the consequences of their actions and publicly apologize. In a gesture of generosity, Brenda accepts their apologies, showing that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. The story concludes with the three friends reflecting on their actions, while Brenda is applauded for her courage and character. In the university hallways, the echoes of laughter and whispers are unmistakable, and the battle between arrogance and humility gains a new dimension. What will Chris, Ethan, and Vincent learn from this experience? Brenda's journey is not just about overcoming a challenge, it is a lesson about the true essence of being human and the value of respecting others. In the days following the party, the atmosphere at the university changed. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent, who had always felt invulnerable in their bubbles of popularity and wealth, now faced an abyss of insecurities and humiliation. The reputation they had so carefully built was crumbling, and the echoes of laughter that once targeted others now turned against them. Each of them dealt with the situation differently. Chris, the most impulsive of the group, felt frustration pulsing through his veins. He could not understand how a simple girl could challenge him in such a way. At school, everyone knew he was the king of the party, and now, that position had been usurped by Brenda. He found himself surrounded by looks of disdain and muffled laughter. What bothered him the most was the fact that, despite everything, Brenda had been magnanimous enough to accept their apologies. He could not shake the feeling that, in some way, he had lost. Ethan, on the other hand, felt guilty. He had always been the most sensitive of the trio, and the situation made him reflect on his values. Brenda's words, the genuine dignity with which she handled the humiliation, deeply marked him. He began to question whether their actions were truly justifiable. The quest for popularity and acceptance no longer seemed worth the price they were paying. While his friends discussed how to take revenge, Ethan distanced himself, seeking a place to think. The idea of confronting Brenda again terrified him, but at the same time, he felt he needed to do something. Vincent, the most calculating of the group, tried to minimize the damage. He attempted to maintain the facade that nothing had changed. "We just need a better plan," he told Chris and Ethan, trying to convince them that the situation was still under control. However, deep down, he too began to feel the pressure. What had once seemed like a fun game was now transforming into an internal battle about who they really were. The idea that they could be seen as villains troubled him, and he began to wonder if the wealth and status they valued so much really mattered. Meanwhile, Brenda moved forward, but not without her own challenges. The victory she seemed to have achieved at the party drew the attention of many, but also the envy of others. Some classmates, who had previously been indifferent, now saw her as a threat. Sarah, a student who always excelled in social activities and who had been one of the targets of Chris and his friends' humiliations, began to view Brenda as a rival. She, who had always positioned herself as the best of the best, was not willing to let the new student overshadow her shine. The tension between the two began to grow, and Brenda felt the pressure of being seen as the new favorite of the university. Brenda tried not to let this affect her. She knew that her true strength lay in her ability to remain true to herself. However, the internal battle was constant. What did it really mean to win? Was it about recognition or about staying true to her principles? The support of Alex, her boyfriend, was crucial. He encouraged her to move forward, reminding her that true victory was inner peace. But even with his love, Brenda felt the weight of responsibility and expectation. The interactions between the four began to intensify. In a study group, Chris and Ethan, still trying to recover from the fiasco, found themselves facing Brenda and Alex. The tension was palpable, and the words that should have been friendly were loaded with subtext. Chris tried to provoke Brenda, but her response was calm and measured. She did not let herself be drawn into the provocation, which only irritated Chris further, as he was used to seeing his attacks take effect. As time went on, Chris realized that arrogance did not shield him from his insecurities. Each interaction with Brenda made him question his own values. Meanwhile, Brenda, while dealing with the pressure and rivalry, began to explore her emotional limits. The battle between humility and arrogance was becoming increasingly intense, and the line between friendship and rivalry was becoming thin. What seemed like a power game was transforming into a lesson about what truly mattered. While Chris, Ethan, and Vincent struggled with their own insecurities, Brenda faced the new social dynamics surrounding her. The university, which had once been a battlefield of egos, was now becoming a space for self-discovery and transformation. And deep down, everyone was about to learn that true strength came not from wealth or popularity, but from the ability to look within and accept who they really were. Chris found himself increasingly isolated. The frustration he felt did not dissipate, and his impulsive behavior began to drive away the few friends he had left. During classes, he noticed the disapproving looks from his peers and felt the weight of the humiliation he had once inflicted on others. Anger mixed with insecurity, and he found himself in a vicious cycle of aggression and regret. In an attempt to regain his status, he decided to throw another party, but the idea was met with laughter and disinterest. The harsh reality was that many no longer wanted to be part of his celebrations. Meanwhile, Ethan was battling an internal storm. The memories of what happened at the party haunted him. He remembered Brenda's words, the strength she showed, and wondered if he would ever be able to act with such dignity. He felt torn between Chris's plans for revenge and his desire to sincerely apologize to Brenda. The social pressure left him distressed, and the pursuit of acceptance felt increasingly hollow. In a moment of weakness, he decided to join Chris and Vincent in their provocations, but doing so left him with a knot in his stomach. It felt as if he was betraying his own principles. Vincent, for his part, tried to maintain a facade of confidence, but inside he was in despair. He realized that his manipulation tactics were not working. What had once seemed like a solid control strategy was now revealing itself as a trap. The group of friends he thought he had under his thumb was disintegrating. The thought of Chris becoming a pariah terrified him. He struggled to find a way to restore the group's image, but with each new attempt, the situation seemed to worsen. What should have been a simple retaliation plan had turned into an emotional burden. Vincent began to question whether his ambition was really worth the cost of his friendships. Brenda, despite having gained a new social status, faced her own challenges. The rivalry with Sarah had intensified. Sarah, unwilling to accept that someone could overshadow her, began to spread rumors about Brenda. The pressure mounted, and with each passing day, Brenda felt more exhausted. Interactions with her peers became a game of chess, where each move could result in a new betrayal. Insecurity began to seep into her mind. She didn't want to be seen as an intruder or someone who constantly had to fight for her place. True victory seemed distant when she realized that behind the popularity lay rivalries and uncertainties. Alex's support was a ray of light amidst the darkness. He encouraged her to focus on herself and not let others' opinions affect her. But even with his love, Brenda felt the pressure. Doubt began to erode her confidence, and she found herself in a dilemma. Should she distance herself from social interactions to protect her mental health, or should she face the competition head-on? The idea of giving up was tempting, but she knew that wasn't what made her strong. The atmosphere at the university grew tense. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent, in their quest to regain control, began to drift apart. Arguments became frequent, and the trust they had built started to unravel. In a moment of anger, Chris accused Ethan of being weak and lacking the courage to take revenge on Brenda. Ethan, in turn, exploded, questioning whether popularity was really worth it. Their friendship was disintegrating, and the tension was palpable. The three, once inseparable, now found themselves on opposite sides of an internal battle. As all of this unfolded, social pressure intensified. Brenda, realizing that people were more interested in gossip than genuine friendship, decided she needed some time for herself. On a rainy afternoon, she sat in a park, reflecting on what truly mattered. What did she want? To be accepted at any cost or to maintain her integrity? The choice became increasingly clear. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent, for their part, were on a path of forced self-discovery. The failures they experienced were painful but also opportunities for growth. As the trio grappled with their insecurities, Brenda began to realize that sometimes true victory was accepting oneself and learning to deal with adversity. What seemed like a battle of egos was transforming into a journey of self-awareness, where everyone would need to confront their limitations and discover what it really meant to be strong. On a sunny morning, as students rushed across campus, Chris decided it was time to act. He was tired of feeling rejected and wanted to regain his prominent position at any cost. With an impulsive plan, he decided to organize a new party, but this time he promised it would be different. He would not only invite the same usual crowd but also the popular students who had ignored him in recent weeks. Chris believed that if he could attract their attention, everything would return to normal. Ethan, upon learning of Chris's plans, felt torn. He knew he could join a party that could be a fresh start for Chris, but at the same time, he felt it was a trap. The idea of being part of something that could cause more pain to Brenda left him uneasy. He remembered the conversation he had with her, the strength she demonstrated in the face of adversity. With that in mind, he decided he needed to confront Chris. On the day of the party, everything seemed perfect. Chris was excited, but as the night progressed, he noticed the atmosphere was tense. guests arrived, but many still looked at him with suspicion. What should have been a celebration began to turn into a nightmare. When the first guests started laughing and whispering about him, frustration exploded. Chris couldn't contain his anger and, in a moment of desperation, hurled an insult at one of the classmates who had ignored him. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan, seeing the scene, realized he needed to act. He approached Chris and, in a firm tone, said, "This isn't going to solve anything, Chris. You're destroying yourself." Chris, overwhelmed with emotion, replied angrily, "You don't understand. I need this. I need people to see that I'm still someone." The tension escalated, and all eyes turned to the two friends. The mood shifted rapidly, and the party, which had begun with promises of fun, was now on the brink of collapse. Vincent, watching from the corner of the room, felt control slipping from his grasp. He wanted to protect the group's image, but the situation was beyond his reach. Amid the chaos, the door to the house swung open, and Brenda entered, unaware of what was about to happen. Seeing Chris in such a vulnerable moment, she felt an urge to help him, but hesitated. Memories of their last interaction haunted her. However, upon seeing the pain in Chris's eyes, she knew she had to do something. Brenda approached and, in a loud voice, said, "Chris, this isn't who you are. This isn't going to take you anywhere." Her voice had a weight that made everyone stop to listen. Chris, surprised and confused, looked at her. It was the last thing he expected to hear that night. Brenda's presence seemed to bring a new energy to the room. She continued, "I know you're struggling, but anger isn't going to solve your problems. You need to look within and understand why this is happening." Brenda's words penetrated deeply into Chris. He began to rethink his choices, the anger that had built up inside him, and the need to be accepted at any cost. The realization that he was drifting away from who he really was shook him. Ethan, observing the interaction, felt a mix of relief and hope. Could this be the moment when Chris finally realized his flaws? Looking at Brenda, he saw someone willing to extend a hand, not to humiliate him, but to help him rise. The party, which was supposed to be a moment of celebration, turned into an opportunity for reflection for everyone present. Chris, in a moment of vulnerability, began to realize that what really mattered wasn't popularity, but authenticity and connection with others. Looking around, he saw not just classmates, but people who could be friends if he was willing to change. The emotional tension was palpable, and everyone was about to witness a transformation. Chris, with tears in his eyes, finally admitted, "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm tired of fighting for something that isn't worth it." These words were a turning point. He was no longer willing to be carried away by the need to be accepted at all costs. As the night progressed, the party, which had started with promises of fun, became a space for dialogue and healing. Laughter turned into sincere conversations, and the bonds that had once been broken began to rebuild. Chris, Ethan, and Vincent, now more aware of their flaws, were ready to face new challenges. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where true strength was found not in popularity, but in the ability to rise after a fall and learn from past mistakes. Chris felt a strange lightness in his chest after revealing his feelings. Brenda's words not only touched his soul but also awakened a desire for change that he had long ignored. He realized that the party, which had begun as a desperate effort for acceptance, had become a space for reflection and reconnection. However, the road ahead was still far from easy. In the days that followed, Chris faced a new challenge, dealing with the truth about himself. He felt vulnerable and exposed, and despite the sense of freedom after opening up, the pressure to fit in still haunted him. At school, the looks from some classmates were different. some mixed curiosity with disdain. Chris realized that, although he had taken a brave step, he couldn't expect everyone to accept him right away. The following week, during lunch, Chris sat at the table with Ethan and Vincent. They talked about the party, laughing at the embarrassing situations that had occurred, but deep down, Chris knew that things wouldn't be that simple. He looked at his friends and said, "I don't want to go back to who I was before. But what if people don't accept me like this?" The insecurity in his voice was evident. Ethan, always the loyal friend, replied, "You can't control what others think, Chris. What matters is that you're being true to yourself. That's what really counts." Chris nodded, but doubts still lingered in his mind. Weeks passed, and despite Chris's conscious effort to be authentic, he realized that not everyone was willing to accept his change. A group of students, who had previously been indifferent to him, now seemed to take pleasure in mocking his new stance. This hit Chris at a time when he felt most vulnerable. One afternoon, while walking down the hall, he heard laughter coming from a nearby group. He approached and unintentionally overheard one of them say, "Look at the noon Chris, trying to be someone he isn't." The words cut like a knife. Chris stopped, his heart racing, and for a moment, thought about walking away and hiding. But then he remembered the strength he had found at the party and decided to confront the situation. He took a deep breath and turned to his classmates. "I am who I am. And if that bothers you, maybe the problem is with you, not me." The courage he felt in that moment was a small triumph, but the feeling of being attacked still left him shaken. That day, Chris decided to seek out Brenda. He knew he needed someone who understood the internal struggle he was going through. When he found her sitting alone in the school courtyard, he hesitated before approaching. But seeing her there, he decided he couldn't let the opportunity pass. "Brenda," he began, a bit nervous. "Can I talk to you?" She looked at him, a shy smile appearing on her face. "Of course, Chris. What's going on?" Chris told her about the comments he had overheard and how they affected him. He felt lost, wanting to be true to himself but dealing with the pain of rejection. Brenda listened attentively, and when he finished, she said, "It's normal to feel this way. Change is hard, and not everyone will understand. But the important thing is to stay true to who you are. Don't let others define your worth." The conversation with Brenda was a relief for Chris. He realized he wasn't alone in his journey and that there were people willing to support him. However, the emotional struggle was still real. In the days that followed, he began practicing self-affirmation, repeating to himself that it was worth being who he was. This helped him cope with the negative comments, but it didn't eliminate the insecurity that followed him. Chris also began to reach out to other students who showed interest in his new attitude. He was surprised to discover that there were more people who felt out of place and who were also seeking a space to be authentic. This new network of friendship began to offer him solid support, and he felt more confident alongside them. However, not everything was easy. The pressure to fit into groups still existed, and Chris realized that, on some occasions, his old need for approval led him to hesitate in being true. He needed to constantly remind himself of the decision he had made, to be authentic even if it meant facing rejection. In moments of solitude, Chris would sit in his room and write in a journal. He recorded his feelings, his victories, and his struggles. This ritual became a form of self-analysis and reflection, helping him process everything he was experiencing. He knew that the path to self-discovery would be long and filled with obstacles, but for the first time, he was willing to face it head-on. The consequences of his transformation were just beginning, and Chris was determined not to give up. Chris continued to navigate his new reality, facing challenges that tested him in ways he had never imagined. Each day, he fought against the pressure to fit in, but he also discovered the strength that came from being true to himself. Brenda's words still resonated in his mind. Don't let others define your worth. This mantra had become a beacon amid the storm of insecurities. He began to realize that internal transformation was an ongoing process. On some days, Chris felt strong and confident, ready to face any challenge. On others, doubt and insecurity returned with full force, especially when he encountered the looks and hurtful comments from some classmates. Chris knew he needed to find a way to overcome these adversities, not only to protect himself but to grow. During one of those difficult moments, he decided to attend a diversity club meeting at school. It was a space where students from different backgrounds could come together and share their experiences. Chris hesitated at the door, his heart racing. But he remembered that he would be among people who understood what he was going through. When he entered, he felt welcomed by the safe environment. Here, he began to open up about his own fears and insecurities. The stories he heard in that space touched his heart. Other students shared their struggles, and Chris realized that he was not alone. This new perspective helped to ease some of the weight he had been carrying. He began to understand that true richness lay not in superficial acceptance from others, but in the ability to be authentic and find genuine connections. As the weeks passed, Chris began to strengthen his friendships with those who accepted him as he was. He connected with people who were also searching for a place where they could be true to themselves, and this helped him develop a newfound confidence. Chris learned to value these connections, which were far more meaningful than any momentary approval he had sought before. These new friends became a vital support source, encouraging him to stay strong on his journey of self-discovery. However, Chris's internal struggle did not disappear completely. He still had days when he felt lost and insecure. One day, while walking through school, he encountered a group of students who ridiculed him again. Instead of letting it affect him, Chris took a deep breath and remembered the lessons he was learning. He decided that he would no longer allow those comments to impact him. He thought to himself, "I am who I am, and that is enough." That night, Chris sat in his room and reflected on what he had learned. He began to write in his journal, recording his experiences and the feelings that accompanied them. Writing became a form of therapy and self-analysis for him. He realized that although there were tough days, each one helped him become stronger and more self-aware. Chris started to apply the lessons he learned at school and in his personal life. He learned to value his opinions and not to be swayed by the need for others' approval. This shift in mindset helped him face new challenges with more determination. He remembered that success was not just about being accepted, but about being true to himself, regardless of the circumstances. Over time, Chris also began to get involved in activities that made him feel good. He joined a theater group, where he could express his creativity and connect with others who shared his interests. This new passion helped him flourish, and he began to find joy in being who he truly was, away from others' expectations. Chris's transformation did not happen overnight, but with each small victory, he felt stronger. He realized that true overcoming was in accepting his journey, with all its difficulties and triumphs. Chris was becoming a more authentic version of himself, a person who not only survived adversity but also learned to thrive through it. As the school year progressed, Chris felt lighter and stronger. He knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but now he was prepared to face them with the courage he had discovered within himself. The path to self-discovery was a continuous journey, and with each step, Chris got closer to who he really was. Chris was at a pivotal moment in his journey. The atmosphere at school had changed, and the pressure to fit in seemed more intense than ever. A new student, Lucas, had arrived and quickly became the center of attention. He was always surrounded by groups of admirers who laughed and chatted animatedly. Chris, who had already struggled so much to find his place, couldn't help but feel a wave of insecurity flood his heart. The idea of being left out or ignored again made him feel small. One morning, while walking down the hallway, Chris heard Lucas mocking someone. It was a shy girl who had difficulty expressing herself. Chris felt a spark of indignation ignite within him. He remembered the times he had been the target of teasing, the wounds that had yet to heal completely. This was the time to act. He took a deep breath, feeling adrenaline coursing through his body, and decided he could no longer remain silent. With firm steps, Chris approached the group. Everyone's gaze turned to him, and for a brief moment, fear took over. But he remembered Brenda's words and all the lessons he had learned. He was fighting not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt small and undervalued. With a trembling voice, yet filled with determination, Chris spoke. "Hey Lucas, do you really think that's funny? Mocking someone just because she's different from you? That's not bravery, it's cowardice. And you know what's even sadder? You may have all these people around you, but being a real person is far more valuable than being the popular one in school." Silence filled the hallway. Chris's classmates looked at him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Lucas, on the other hand, was momentarily speechless, clearly caught off guard. Chris felt his heart race, but he did not back down. He continued, "We all have our battles. We all have our insecurities. But mocking others doesn't make you better. On the contrary, it only shows how much you need to feel superior to compensate for your own flaws." The tension in the air was palpable. Chris expected Lucas to react hostilely, but to his surprise, the new student lowered his head. The group that had once surrounded Lucas began to disperse, and one of the girls, who always seemed so confident, approached Chris. "Thank you for saying that, Chris. I've always admired your courage," she said, and Chris felt a warmth rise within him. Her words were like a balm for his insecurities. He noticed that other students began to approach as well, some with supportive smiles, others with reflective expressions. In that moment, Chris realized that true strength did not come from being accepted by everyone, but from being true to oneself and standing up for what was right. He had overcome his greatest challenge, the need for approval, the struggle against insecurity, and the courage to stand up for those who could not defend themselves. From that day on, Chris became a role model at school. He began organizing small gatherings where everyone could share their stories and support one another. The diversity club he had attended expanded, attracting more students seeking a safe space. Chris felt fulfilled, not only for having found his voice but for helping others find theirs. As Chris reflected on this journey, he remembered everything he had faced. He thought about the failures that had brought him to this point, the times he felt lost, and the victories that helped him rise again. He realized that each of those moments, no matter how painful, contributed to shaping who he was. Chris learned that true wealth lay in the genuine connections he had created and the friendships that solidified amid adversity. He discovered that success was not just about being popular or accepted, but about being authentic and having the courage to be himself. With this new understanding, Chris felt light, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. In the end, what he truly found was a new family, friends who supported him, who listened to him, and with whom he could share his joys and sorrows. And so, Chris walked through the school, knowing that although the journey of self-discovery would never end, he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Chris felt a mix of relief and euphoria as he walked down the hall after that confrontation. He had stood up for himself and for others, and now the reactions around him surprised him. What had once been a place of insecurity and fear now seemed like a space full of potential and support. Throughout the day, he noticed that some students began to approach him with encouraging smiles. One of them was Gabriel, a boy who always seemed to be on the sidelines. Gabriel said, "I never thought you would have the courage to say that to Lucas," his eyes shining with admiration. "I always wanted to say something but never had the courage. You inspired me." Chris smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. That was one of the outcomes he had hoped for. He wanted others to feel encouraged to stand up for themselves and support one another. "Thank you, Gabriel. We all have to help each other, you know? We can't let the cowardice of a few stop us from being ourselves." During lunch, the group of students gathering around Chris grew. He realized that it was no longer just about him. It was about everyone. Conversations began to flow, and stories of overcoming challenges were shared. Students who had once felt isolated found a safe space to express their concerns and insecurities. Chris was happy to see how people connected, as if his words had opened a door that had previously been closed. While talking with a group, Chris noticed Lucas in the distance. The new student was alone, watching the movement. Chris remembered what he had said to him. This was an opportunity to show that real change came not just from confrontations but also from understanding. He decided to approach. "Hey, Lucas," Chris said, trying to sound friendly. "Can I join you?" Lucas's gaze was a mix of surprise and hesitation. Chris sat down beside him, sensing the tension in the air. "You know, I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to talk. That day was hard for you, and I understand." Lucas looked at Chris, and in his eyes, Chris saw a mix of shame and sadness. "I didn't know I was hurting anyone," Lucas replied, his voice low. "I just wanted to be accepted, but I realized that the way I tried to do that was wrong." Chris nodded, understanding that Lucas was also struggling with his own insecurities. "We all have our battles, Lucas. But we don't need to hurt others to feel better about ourselves. We can come together and create an environment where everyone feels accepted." The conversation flowed, and Chris realized that behind the facade of popularity, Lucas was also a lost young man trying to find his way. As the two spoke, a new connection began to form. Chris learned that empathy was a powerful tool, capable of transforming rivalries into friendships. In the days that followed, Chris dedicated himself to strengthening the new support network that was forming in the school. He organized meetings where everyone could share their experiences, laughing and crying together. The Diversity Club began to grow, attracting more and more students who wanted a safe space to express themselves. But the impact of Chris's actions was not limited to just him. Other students began to stand up as well, challenging bullying behaviors and promoting inclusion. The school started to change, and Chris felt part of something bigger. He realized that true change was not just about a single act of courage, but about the collective courage of a united community. On a sunny afternoon, while organizing an event to celebrate differences, Chris reflected on how much he had changed. He remembered the moments of doubt and fear, but now, surrounded by friends and supporters, he felt strong. He told Brenda, who was by his side, that he never imagined this could happen. He just wanted to make a difference and look at where they had come. Brenda smiled, proud of what they had achieved together. She said he was proof that an act of courage could inspire others to stand up. And this was just the beginning. Chris looked at his friends, laughing and talking. He knew he had found his place, not just in school, but within himself. He was ready to continue this journey of self-discovery and acceptance, one step at a time, surrounded by people who shared the same vision of a better world. Chris glanced at the small group gathered around him, all sharing laughter and stories. His heart warmed with the certainty that he had made the right choice. That journey, which had started with fear and insecurity, had now transformed into something extraordinary. He remembered the day he confronted Lucas and how, from that moment on, everything changed. His act of courage not only impacted his own life but also the lives of many others. The school, which had once been a dark place for several students, now pulsed with life and acceptance. Chris realized that true strength lay in his ability to unite people, to inspire them to stand up and support one another. He and Gabriel, along with other friends, organized gatherings where everyone could express themselves, a safe space where voices were heard and respected. Lucas, who had once been seen as an antagonist, became part of the new community. They talked, learned from each other, and gradually formed an unexpected friendship. Chris understood that everyone has their struggles and that empathy can be a path to transformation. This evolution not only changed Lucas but also helped him see the world in a broader way. Their friendship was a testament that behind every conflict, there could be an opportunity for growth and understanding. The impact of Chris's actions was not limited to a small group of friends but spread throughout the school. Other students, inspired by his courage, began to stand up against bullying and promote inclusion. The change was slow but steady, and Chris realized that the true strength of the community lay in the connections they formed. At a special event to celebrate diversity, Chris felt more fulfilled than ever. He looked at all those smiling faces, noticing how much they had evolved together. He reflected on his own journey of self-discovery, from fear to courage, from loneliness to friendship. He had learned that true success was not about being popular or feared, but about being respected and loved for who he truly was. The real wealth lay in the connections he had created. Chris expressed gratitude, telling everyone that he wouldn't be who he was today without them. Each of them had contributed to this incredible change. Together, they were stronger. As the party continued, Chris realized that the journey was still ongoing, but he was ready. He knew challenges would come, but now he had a community by his side, people who cared and were willing to fight for a better world. And so, Chris's story became a testament to the power of courage and empathy. He learned that by standing up for himself, he also lifted others. And this was the greatest achievement of all. Chris not only changed himself but also the environment around him, creating a legacy of support and acceptance. Everyone is invited to reflect on their own experiences and ask themselves, what changes can I make in my community? What small actions can lead to big transformations? If you have ever felt inspired to act, share your story in the comments. Your voice can motivate others to stand up too. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate change and the strength of community. The time to act is now.